What happens when a Karen's attitude meets the laws of physics? I'm Tucker, and this is Last Moments. Today, we're diving into the dumbest water park disasters in internet history. From a Karen who went looking for secret drinks behind a closed water park bar, to a Karen who dragged an oversized float into a wave pool, only to face huge waves in the most horrifying way. It was July 14th, 2015, a hot Tuesday at a crowded water park in Central Florida. Behind several attractions sat a fenced maintenance lagoon clearly marked as a restricted area for park operations. Pim Flor Rudd was 46 years old and worked in office administration. She had come to the park with two friends for what was supposed to be a relaxing day out. Friends described her as outspoken and stubborn. When she felt something was unfair, she rarely kept her opinion to herself. That attitude became a problem that afternoon. Behind several attractions sat a maintenance lagoon surrounded by a chain-link fence. Large warning signs were posted all around it. Employee access only, restricted area, keep out. Inside were pumps, pipes, and other infrastructure used to operate parts of the water park. Running along one section of the lagoon was a narrow concrete service ledge used by maintenance workers. Pim noticed the restricted area and immediately complained about it. She argued that paying customers should have access to every part of the park. Eventually, she approached an employee stationed nearby and demanded an explanation. There should be no question here anymore. When a place has warning signs and restricted access, there is usually a good reason for it. The employee calmly explained that the lagoon was part of the park's maintenance system and was not safe for visitors. Pim appeared unhappy with the answer and walked away. A short time later, she came back. Witnesses saw her grab the fence and begin climbing. Despite the warnings, and despite being told directly to stay out, she pulled herself over and dropped into the restricted area. This wasn't a split-second mistake. She had already been told why the area was off-limits and still chose to go in anyway. The concrete service ledge sat roughly 8 feet above the water. It was narrow, damp, and coated in patches of algae. Pim took only a few steps before her feet suddenly slipped. She fell sideways. The right side of her head struck the concrete wall first. Her shoulder hit next. Then she plunged into the lagoon below. For several seconds, she disappeared beneath the surface. When she resurfaced, witnesses could immediately tell something was wrong. She looked disoriented. As she tried to stay afloat, she repeatedly reached for the wall but seemed unable to properly use one arm. The lagoon walls were smooth concrete with almost nothing to grab onto. Each attempt to pull herself out ended with her sliding back into the water. Guests on the other side of the fence began shouting for help. Employees responded immediately, but access to the lagoon required passing through secured service gates. For a short time, Pim remained above water before slipping beneath the surface and failing to resurface. Rescuers pulled her from the lagoon moments later, but she could not be revived. Her death was ruled an accidental drowning following injuries sustained in the fall. Security footage confirmed that Pim climbed the fence and entered the restricted area after being warned by staff. Investigators found no equipment failures or safety violations by the park. Following the incident, park management reviewed access controls around maintenance areas and added additional warning signage to discourage future trespassing. Pim ignored a restricted area because she believed the rules shouldn't apply to her. The next story begins with Karens who felt the same way about a safety rule. It was July 19th, 2022. By mid-morning, a small family-run water park was already crowded as temperatures climbed above 90 degrees. Several bars throughout the park were doing brisk business. That's where we meet Deborah Wiley. She was 47 years old and worked as a school administrator. People who knew her described her as loud, confident, and someone who always needed to feel like she was winning. Her friend Carol, 51, had been between jobs for a few months. The two had planned this trip after Deborah found a deal online: unlimited drink wristbands, one flat price, all day long at any bar in the park. But to be fair, that was a good deal. So I understand Deborah and Carol here. From the moment they arrived, Deborah and Carol turned their day into a competition, constantly keeping score of who had more drinks, wasted less time in line, and made the smarter bar-hopping choices. Other guests nearby would later describe the two as hard to ignore. The loud counting, the complaints about wait times, the constant planning of where to go next before the current drink was even finished. By early afternoon, they had each had close to 10 margaritas and were were still moving. They had also turned down free water twice from a passing staff member. In their heads, water was a waste of the wristband. Then the swim-up bar near the wave pool shut down. A power issue had knocked out part of the park's electrical system. Signs went up. Staff directed guests to another bar about 300 feet away. Deborah and Carol refused to walk. They stood near the closed bar, visibly frustrated. Then Deborah spotted an employee-only gate built into the fence beside the wave pool. Witnesses later told park staff that the two women spent several minutes convincing each other that drinks were still being served on the other side, and workers were keeping customers out on purpose. I keep asking myself, would any of this have happened if Carol wasn't there to agree with her? I'm not sure it would have. They pushed through the gate. The corridor on the other side was narrow, dim, and smelled like motor oil. There was no bar, no drinks, just pipes, panels, and equipment running in the heat. None of that stopped them. On the other side was a narrow service corridor holding the pumps, wiring panels, and equipment that kept the wave pool running. A technician had been working on an open electrical cabinet during the outage and had stepped away briefly while the system restarted. Deborah walked straight up to the open cabinet. Her hands were wet from the pool. She grabbed inside it. The shock knocked her off her feet. Carol reached down and grabbed her arm to pull her back. The current passed through both of them. A guest outside the fence heard screaming and ran for staff immediately. Emergency crews arrived within minutes. Deborah was pronounced dead at the scene. Carol survived but was left with lasting nerve damage in her left arm and hand. Investigators confirmed Deborah died from electrocution. The gate had not been locked, which the park reviewed and addressed, but the core finding was clear. Both women entered a restricted area without permission. The technician had followed proper procedure throughout, and no fault was placed on him or the maintenance work. The park's unlimited drink program was suspended for the remainder of the season, pending a full safety review. Deborah ignored the warnings. This next Karen would do the same. The only difference was where those warnings led. It was August 11th, 2018, at a water park on the Gulf Coast. The wave pool was crowded that afternoon, and staff closely monitored what kinds of floats guests were allowed to bring into the water. That rule would end up mattering more than anything else that day. The woman at the center of it was Princess Natalie Tovey, 37 years old, an event planner, and someone who liked doing things her own way. She had come to the park to enjoy the day, but she also brought a large inflatable float from home. It was much bigger than the kinds of floats the park allowed in the wave pool. Witnesses said Natalie was outspoken and stubborn, and once staff told her the float was not approved, she took that as something to argue with instead of something to follow. Her motive was simple and clear. She believed her float was better, safer, and more comfortable than the park's rules. Lifeguards stopped her before she entered the pool and told her the inflatable was too large for that attraction. They explained that it was not approved. She did not accept that. She kept insisting the float was fine and acted like the rule did not really apply to her. Staff repeated the warning, but she went in anyway. She was warned clearly, and that should have been enough. At first, nothing dramatic happened. Natalie climbed onto the float and drifted farther from the shallow end. The pool was producing steady waves, and each one pushed guests a little deeper or a little sideways unless they corrected themselves. But Natalie's float was harder to control than the smaller approved ones around her. Because it was oversized, it turned more slowly and caught more force from each wave. People nearby later said it kept rotating sideways instead of staying straight. That became the problem. A stronger wave pushed the float toward one corner of the pool. Natalie did not get it turned back in time. The inflatable slammed into the concrete wall on its side. The impact damaged part of the float and caused one section to fold inward. Instead of bouncing cleanly away, the float bent around her and trapped her under the sagging material near the wall. Now she was in the worst place possible. The corner gave her less room to move. The wall blocked one side, and the folded float pressed her down while the next waves kept hitting. Each wave forced the collapsed material tighter against her and held her underwater longer. Nearby guests noticed something was wrong, and lifeguards rushed in. And that's what makes this whole thing so frustrating. It started with one rule she refused to follow. Rescuers reached the corner quickly, but the float itself made the rescue harder. It was big, heavy with water, and awkward to pull free while the waves were still moving it. Staff had to drag the inflatable away from the wall before they could fully get to Natalie. By the time they removed her from under it, she had been underwater too long. Emergency aid started right away, but she did not survive. Investigators reviewed witness statements, staff reports, and the conditions in the wave pool. Multiple witnesses confirmed that lifeguards had warned Natalie before she entered with the oversized inflatable. Investigators found no evidence of a mechanical malfunction or defect in the wave pool. The official cause of death was ruled drowning after she became trapped beneath her inflatable in the wave pool. The attraction was temporarily closed during the investigation and later reopened after authorities determined the facility was operating as intended. The park subsequently reviewed and reinforced its policies regarding oversized inflatables in the wave pool. Natalie learned the hard way why safety rules exist. The next one begins with a disagreement that should have ended in less than a minute. It was July 22, 2017, at a crowded water park in Arizona. The lazy river was packed with guests floating on tubes and family rafts through a slow-moving current. Like most lazy rivers, it relied on riders continuing to move with the flow rather than stopping in the channel. Jackie Mize, a 34-year-old, a fitness instructor, was visiting the park with co-workers when a minor disagreement began. A nearby group had been splashing water in her direction. Whether it was intentional or simply people playing around was never clear, but Jackie took offense and confronted them. Voices were raised, drawing attention from nearby guests and employees. Staff instructed everyone involved to calm down and continue moving with the current. I'll be honest, getting splashed at a water park can be annoying, but I've never understood turning something that minor into a full-blown confrontation. Unlike everyone else, Jackie refused to let it go. She stepped off her tube and stood in the middle of the channel with her feet on the concrete floor. The current flowed around her as tubes and rafts began collecting behind her. Guests had to paddle around her while others slowed down to avoid collisions. Employees repeatedly instructed her to clear the channel, but witnesses said she ignored the warnings and remained focused on the argument. What started as a dispute over a few splashes had become an obstruction in one of the busiest attractions in the park. And if you think about it, she was given multiple chances to end the situation. As Jackie remained in place, a large family raft drifted around a bend in the river. The riders had no reason to expect an adult standing motionless in the channel, and because of the curve, they did not see her until they were relatively close. Nearby guests shouted warnings, but witnesses said Jackie appeared unaware of how close it had become. By the time she noticed it, there was little opportunity to react. The raft struck her from behind, forcing her forward while her legs remained planted. Her feet slipped on the submerged concrete, and she fell forward. Witnesses said she was unable to get her hands out in time to break the fall, and her head struck the floor of the lazy river with significant force. Witnesses immediately realized something was wrong. Instead of standing back up, Jackie appeared dazed and unresponsive. Several guests reported that she made little or no attempt to recover after impact. Her body rolled beneath the surface as the current continued carrying tubes and rafts through the area. The congestion she had created made it difficult to immediately determine where she had gone under. Once lifeguards realized she had not resurfaced, they rushed to the scene. The congestion around the area delayed the rescue, and by the time she was brought to the surface, she had spent too long underwater. Despite emergency treatment, she did not survive. The official cause of death was drowning following a blunt force head injury sustained during the fall. Investigators later determined that the attraction had been operating normally and that the family raft had been moving with the current as intended. The riders had no realistic opportunity to stop or avoid the collision once they became aware of Jackie's presence. Employees had instructed her multiple times to continue moving with the flow of the attraction, and investigators found no evidence of any mechanical or operational failure. Authorities ultimately ruled the death accidental, concluding that the fatal injuries resulted from the fall, head trauma, and subsequent drowning. It was a sad story, and we learned that sometimes we have to let go of our ego. Up next is someone who hears no and treats it like a challenge. It was June 9th, 2018, a Saturday at a water park in Georgia. The park was busy, and one of its most popular attractions was a fully enclosed body slide that dispatched riders at timed intervals to prevent collisions inside the chute. Hundreds of guests had already ridden it that day without incident. Rachel Camp was 43 years old and worked in property management. She was used to being the one making decisions and often became frustrated when things didn't operate on her schedule. Waiting in long lines was not something she handled particularly well. well. The slide she wanted to ride had attracted a steady queue throughout the afternoon. Riders were sent one at a time, with attendants carefully controlling the spacing between each dispatch. The procedure was simple, routine, and designed to keep guests from catching up to one another inside the enclosed slide. Rachel approached the attendants and told them she wanted a private run on the attraction. She asked that no other guests be sent before or after her during her ride. The attendants explained that every rider followed the same dispatch schedule and that no special accommodations could be made. Rachel argued that paying customers deserved better treatment. The discussion grew increasingly heated until security arrived and instructed her to leave the loading platform. And based on what we know about her, it's no surprise the situation quickly spiraled. Eventually, Rachel appeared to back down. She walked away from the loading area, and most people nearby assumed the situation had ended. It had not. Instead of leaving the attraction entirely, Rachel remained nearby. A restricted access gate separated guests from the operational side of the ride. For several minutes, she stood there watching attendants load riders and dispatch them into the enclosed chute. Then, during a moment when staff were occupied assisting guests at the launch platform, she climbed over the barrier and entered the restricted area. After crossing the barrier, Rachel located a maintenance access hatch along the exterior of the slide and entered through it. Believing she could walk uphill through the chute and force staff to stop the ride, she stepped inside the enclosed slide. What she could not see was that a rider had already been dispatched moments earlier. The slide's design made visibility almost impossible. Sharp turns and enclosed sections blocked any line of sight. The rider moving through the darkness had no idea anyone had entered through the restricted access point. Likewise, operators had no indication that Rachel was inside the ride. As far as they knew, only the properly dispatched rider was in the chute. Somewhere inside one of the blind curves, the two met. The rider came out of a steep descent at high speed and entered the turn with only fractions of a second to react. There was no warning and nowhere to go. The collision knocked Rachel off balance and threw her head first into the rigid fiberglass wall lining the curve. Her head absorbed the brunt of the impact. The rider came to a stop further down the slide and began shouting for help. Operators at the bottom quickly realized something was wrong when the ride's normal flow suddenly stopped. The attraction was shut down immediately, and staff entered the slide from the exit end to reach the scene. Emergency responders were called, but the injuries were catastrophic. Rachel was pronounced dead from the trauma she suffered inside the slide. Security cameras covering the loading platform and restricted access area captured the key events leading up to the collision: Rachel's return to the attraction and her climb over the barrier. Dispatch logs confirmed that a rider had already been sent into the slide before she entered the chute. Authorities conclude that Rachel had entered an active ride without authorization and placed herself directly in the path of an oncoming rider. What stands out to me is that every safety system on the ride was working exactly as intended. The only thing that was not accounted for was someone entering the slide from a place riders were never supposed to be. Rachel spent so much time fighting the rules that she stopped thinking about why they existed. The final story follows someone who brought that same mindset into a crowded wave pool. It was June 9th, 2020, at a small water park in Georgia. One of the park's most popular attractions had been closed for maintenance that afternoon. Orange barriers blocked the entrance, warning signs told guests to stay out, and employees directed visitors toward other rides. Behind the attraction sat a fenced service area containing the equipment that kept it running. The woman involved was Teresa Macy Harris. She was 45 years old and worked as a retail district manager. People who knew her described her as outspoken, stubborn, and someone who often believed she knew better than the people around her. She had come to the park with relatives and was frustrated to find her favorite attraction closed. Teresa approached employees several times, asking why guests were being denied access. Staff explained that maintenance work was underway and the attraction would reopen when it was safe. Witnesses later said she seemed convinced the closure was unnecessary. As the afternoon continued, Teresa became convinced that employees were exaggerating the situation. The more she thought about it, the more determined she became to prove she was right. "I've noticed that some people see a safety barrier and immediately assume someone is hiding something from them." Eventually, Teresa's relatives left to enjoy other attractions, but she stayed near the closed area. Employees were busy moving supplies between maintenance locations behind the attraction. Security footage later showed Teresa walking around the perimeter, looking for another way inside. A service gate had been temporarily opened while workers transported equipment. During the activity, Teresa slipped through unnoticed and entered the restricted section of the park. The fenced yard contained burned pipes, pumps, storage tanks, and utility buildings. Warning signs throughout the area told unauthorized people to stay out. Teresa walked toward one of the maintenance buildings, apparently believing it contained controls connected to the closed attraction. Earlier that day, workers inside had been handling pool treatment chemicals. During the process, an accidental chemical reaction released chlorine gas inside the structure. Employees immediately evacuated the building and began ventilating it, while waiting for testing to confirm it was safe to re-enter. Teresa did not know any of that. Security footage showed her approaching the doorway and stepping inside. Within moments, employees outside heard violent coughing coming from the building. Teresa quickly emerged, but appeared distressed and disoriented. Workers rushed to help her as she struggled to breathe. Emergency medical services were called immediately. Paramedics transported her to a hospital, where doctors treated her for severe lung injuries caused by the exposure. Although she initially survived, the damage led to serious respiratory complications. Over the following days, her condition worsened despite treatment. Teresa eventually died from those complications. Investigators reviewed security footage, witness statements, maintenance records, and employee reports. The evidence confirmed that barriers, warning signs, and restricted access notices had been in place throughout the area, and cameras showed Teresa entering the building without authorization. The official finding was accidental death resulting from chlorine gas exposure after unauthorized entry into a restricted maintenance building. And on this final story, we learn one thing. Sometimes the biggest mistake isn't ignoring a warning sign, it's convincing yourself that everyone giving the warning is wrong.